Okay, sure, we can get started. So, hello everyone. Welcome to my talk about how to conquer the curse of knowledge bias while building fintech. Let's just start with some quick intro. That is me. I have worked at a lot of different places, including Gusto, DriveWealth, Microsoft, Pinterest. I'm a photographer, a musical nerd. I currently live in New York City, but I'm from Atlanta, so I say like, hey, you, sir. So a little bit of a balance. Last year, I spoke about developer relations, which is kind of my area of expertise. I also love a good GIF, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to fight you. And it was filled with dog GIFs. I really enjoyed that. This year, however, our theme is going to be cartoons. So everyone open up your books, your laptops, and let's get ready to learn. So what are we going to go over today? We're going to start with what is the curse of knowledge. We're going to go, where is the curse of knowledge in fintechs? Overcoming it, and then we're going to have some time for questions, chit chat, more giggles, whatever you want to call it. So what is the curse of knowledge? It was coined in 1989, and it's a bias that occurs when an individual assumes that someone else has a similar background and depth of knowledge. Some call it the curse of expertise. Just by hearing that, you all are probably going, that sounds a lot like fintech people, right? So we're gonna need one volunteer. I do have a backup volunteer. You do get a prize if you come up and volunteer, but we're gonna do a quick experiment. So who would like to come up? Come on up. Okay, so I have a piece of paper here, and it has a song on it, and I'm going to ask you to clap this song out, okay? Everyone in this room knows this song, I promise, and I want, after you clap it, I want you to tell me how many people, I don't know, we have like 15 people, 20 people, percentage, how many people you think are gonna get it right, okay?
So after I clap it?
After you clap it, right? And then we're gonna see, you do know the song.
Okay. So I'm gonna clap that
You're
song.
gonna clap like the first two lines.
Should I tell you now how many people I think are
Yeah,
gonna
how
get
many
it?
people do you think are gonna get it?
50%.
Okay, you think 50%? Okay, so now let's clap.
Okay.
So clap out like the first two lines.
Okay. I'm feeling like the percentage is going down now.
Yeah, keep going. Keep going. Do the next line. Or you can just, yeah,
You know,
go.
it's not gonna change much.
Keep going, I know. There you go. Okay.
Wow.
Well, so here's a Tabasco bottle, a mini Tabasco bottle for your that I stole from breakfast, and that's everyone else can clap. Does anyone who does not know what the song is know what the song is? Have you been told what it was? Okay, what is it? It is not Mary Had a Little Lamb. Anyone else have a guess? It's Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So ready? I'll clap it again. Ready? We're gonna clap like. Did you all hear it now? Yes. Right, so that's the curse of knowledge bias. That's literally what they did. So in 1990, a woman named Dr. Elizabeth Newton at Stanford did exactly this with a group of people, right? And what she found was they kind of finger tapped the songs. Tappers estimated half the listeners would get the songs right? They were so confident. Out of 150 songs, most listeners only got 2 correct. That's a huge difference, right? And a little extra bonus to that, male tappers assumed more that people would get it right, with an average of 56% of people getting it right, while women assumed 44%. They also did some other fun things with this study where they had another person who just read what it said and would listen, because once you know the song, you hear it when you clap, right? And so even that person was biased based off of it. So that alone is how they decided what the curse of knowledge is. So it's really hard to imagine not knowing something once you know it, right? in fintech, right, we learn all these really complicated terms and words and acronyms that you just assume everyone knows, right? KYC, know your customer. BOD, beginning of day. FBO, for benefit of. AML, anti-money laundering. RTP, real-time payments, right? These are all terms that are used regularly, and at some point I had to Google them, right? This doesn't help customers by sharing what this information means. It helps new employees and people who don't know. Microsoft actually was pretty infamous. They had a tool that you could go to, like a internal page, where you could, it was a dictionary for acronyms, because there were so many, right? And it was called like what? It was whack, whack, what? What is whack, whack? That's 2 backslashes, which also, they don't tell you that, right? Pinterest had an entire Confluence page. I've worked at places that had, spreadsheets where you could just add it in as you like found one, because people just keep finding them, right? So, right, it's really hard to imagine not knowing. I infamously last year put up Tinder, my own Tinder. I'm doing it again. I asked a bunch of people who I considered rather smart what KYC means. Okay, these are real answers. I did not prompt these people. I said, what does KYC mean, right? We had know your crap. That was from my basketball team. He just answered really quickly and went, cool York City. What? And then my friend who worked at Amazon as a product manager for the Alexa team, okay? I said, I need you to answer this. Key yield components, right? And he was like, that sounds fintechy, right? So why am I saying all of this and why am I showing all of this? Because what we need is empathy, right? That is our first step. So here's a great little Bob's Burger GIF for you all, which I personally really enjoy and I felt was very fitting to our talk. So how to overcome the curse of knowledge. Step 1, admit that you have the curse of knowledge bias. It's very hard to admit when we're wrong or when we know something, but we all need to do it, right? So step 1, admit it. Admit that we make mistakes and that we assume things. We all do it, right? Our next step is we have to work on changing our vocabulary, right? We need to reduce jargon. Fintech has a lot of jargon in it, a lot, right? And we constantly have them, and we need ways, if you can, to reduce it. If you can't reduce it, explain it, right? And then if you're unsure if it's industry specific or not, right? Ask a friend or family member if they've heard of the term, right? Or check somewhere else, right? So in all of this, right, as we're building our empathy, you have to go in with empathy, go in knowing that, I don't know. I know something that you might not know, and you know something I might not know. Taking that in as you start will get you really far in your path to empathy. A really good example of this is from Polygon.io, which is a startup out of Atlanta. They have a knowledge base that goes over things like, what are the hours for the Forex market? This is something that someone who works in Forex is like, I know that. But a developer who's building out something to your tool won't have any idea what those hours are because they're not an expert. They're looking at you to be the expert for them, right? Use the search bar on your website. As you have a search bar, see what people are commonly looking up. That will tell you where people need help, where they're getting stuck in knowledge, right? And also, as you build, make sure your developers understand what they're building, right? We often just hand developers a PRD and we say, go build this. But if they don't know what the Forex market hours are and what that even means and why that's important, how are they going to build to it? So to keep going, the next step we want to do is we want to change our vocabulary. Words matter. Words matter a lot. I often start meetings by saying that you can't use the words simple, easy, or quick, which is really hard because you end up saying, oh, that was really easy, or just simply do this step. It's simple to you because you know it. It is not simple to everyone around you, right? It's not as easy as you think to calculate hours worked if you don't know the calculations for hours worked, right? If you are given an hourly salary and say, what's the yearly income? Most people have to then sit and go, okay, how many weeks, how many hours in a day, how many weeks? Oh wait, then I have to subtract the holidays. Now I have to multiply by how many weeks are there in a year, right? And it takes a second, right? But someone who's in it is like, oh, you multiply by 24, then by 5, then by 52. It's like, how was I supposed to know that? I don't know it off the top of my head. Tell people, because it's not as easy as you think. Our next one is my little bit of a joke. We also need to KYC. We need to know our customers, right? We need to learn who your customer is and create personas, right? Create personas for the developers, create personas for the administration, admins, end users, companies, product managers, every single person who's involved in your tool. Create a persona for them. Give them different levels of education of how much knowledge they have in your niche part of the fintech world, right? Do they have, an MBA? Are they a new college grad? There's all these different levels of knowledge. Do they have 5 years of experience, 10 years of experience, right? Each one of them will give you a different insight of how you build something. So using these personas regularly help you to inform your product. It's also really important to think about B2B versus B2C or B2B2C, right? Each one has different personas that kind of start to add up as you go. So now that you have personas, I recommend friction logging. What is friction logging? It's basically writing out step by step what a user is going to do based off of their persona and then doing it. So it's the very famous peanut butter and jelly test that many people did in middle school, right? Where the teacher says, write down the steps of how to make a peanut butter and jelly, and then you sit there and watch them as they stick a knife into peanut butter and don't remove it, or like use their hand to spread peanut butter on bread. Write out the steps fully as the different personas and act as that persona would. I often like to say that it's like playing D&D. I've gotten really into D&D in the past 2 years, and take dice and roll for initiative if you really want to, right? You need to go through the steps as a persona to practice everything. I hit my mic. Cool. So I also recommend creating persona goals, right? So as an X, I want to Y. As you're building out your product, practice this. As a developer, I want to transfer money from my end user's account to the IRS. What does that mean, and what are the steps that I need to do that? Right? As an end user business, I want to rehire a previously terminated employee. What are the steps? How do I get that information? And what's really great about these different things is they don't just help with your friction logging, they also can help you find gaps in your product, right? Because you'll see, oh, here's this weird route you can take as this persona and you end up in a dead end. You can then backtrack and then build around it. I also recommend with this to try a talk aloud, which was a thing I learned a lot about at Microsoft. Basically, you say the thoughts and actions out loud. At Microsoft, when they used to do these with kids for Minecraft education, they said to think you were a YouTuber. They were like, imagine you have a YouTube channel and you're reacting to something. If you think about that, right, they say everything that's happening on the screen, do that. Again, it just is to help you build that empathy and find those different things. Another good pro tip is to use your persona goals to write documentation. So this is actually from Gusto. And my pro tip is to always use what I call the verb noun, right? So you have rehire an employee, terminate an employee. And in those different parts in your documentation, write out the steps for those users, right? This helps you check for common themes gives you those common examples and helps your developers as they build to know what to do, right? And it can be used both internally and externally. Another great thing is KISS, which, yes, another acronym, but as you can see, we say what it means. It means keep it simple, stupid. Less is also almost always better when writing documentation and writing for these different things to create empathy. You want to start high level when we're explaining things, right? And give them as much information as needed. You can have conversations here that are about the most niche and obscure rules of finance, but a developer who's building doesn't care, and that's okay. They don't need to be a nerd about finance to want to build with finance, and we have to respect that. One of my favorite graphics for this is actually from Plaid. This is how they explain OAuth, which is an extremely complicated process. I've coded OAuth, I've worked with it, and they explain it in one graphic, right? They don't have to go too in depth. You get just enough information to understand how it works and to be able to do it, right? Even someone who's completely non-technical can look at this picture, read it, and go, I understand how OAuth works. They might not be able to build an OAuth system, but they can probably implement one. Another great step is let's provide context. So give examples and use cases that are relevant. So if you have employees, think about how they will interact with their employees. What are the different steps they're actually going to do? Build examples around that, right? Create sample code in web apps, right? And tailor and change your examples for that. Create verticals, right? Because different verticals also have different use cases and how they use things. For Gusto, we looked at hourly employees different than W-2 employees, right? And some employees required tips, some didn't. All those different things help you to think about how your customer is interacting and also helps with this never-ending deluge of empathy that we have to work on. The best pro tip I can say is use your personas to make sure you are providing the right information, right? It's really hard, again, to go in not knowing, but you have to practice that like empty mind trick, right? Like go in fully clear and then dive in. Moov does actually a really great example of this. So here's their documentation, and you can see they have different use cases listed out. So we have everything from collect payments, facilitate transfer, issue cards, right? From this, you know exactly what you can do and how to do it. It walks you through. This isn't only useful for, say, external partners. This also helps teach your internal developers what your product is and how to use it. One of the most common things I see is that internal developers don't know what their own product does. They can use it if they have access to internal tools, if they can activate things on their side. But the second that they have to do it from an external viewpoint, it's like they can't do it. They don't know what's happening. So working on creating this deep fintech knowledge internally helps you to create a deep fintech knowledge externally. So it's all about connection. It all overlaps. My other final piece of advice is to iterate and refine. You're never going to get something right the first time, and anyone who says they do is lying to you, truly. So you're not going to get your documentation, you're not going to get this curse of knowledge solved immediately. So take the time and know that you'll get it wrong. Look for the common themes as you go and iterate, right? You'll add one thing, and then you'll find a whole deluge of other problems. It's not a one-stop shop, right? So you do it once, you'll find new errors, and that's okay. That's what you're supposed to do. You're never gonna reach perfect. That's kind of why I love this bias, right? You know, you keep trying different things because you don't know your own audience. So wrapping this up a little bit, we all have the curse of knowledge bias. The thing that we have to do is recognize it to be able to work around it, right? The cursive knowledge bias is an ongoing process that requires practice, adaptability, and a genuine desire to foster understanding, right? So by combining all these different strategies we talked about, you can become a more effective communicator and bridge the gap between your knowledge and others' understanding. So how do we overcome this bias? Empathy, changing your words, learning about your customers and putting yourself in their shoes, providing context and concrete examples, and always being okay to iterate. These are all the different steps that we need to do in order to succeed in defeating this very silly bias that everyone has. So I have a bunch of time for questions because I view that this is one of those ones that everyone has a question about and has some sort of thought about how they can apply it to themselves. So does anyone have any questions, concerns, thoughts, opinions? Yes.
What are some good resources, as maybe developers are coming into your fintech, to get started working, that explain, what a lot of these acronyms mean? Are there existing resources that we can point people to without having to build it all internally?
Yeah, so some resources, the question was about like what resources exist for a lot of the knowledge, right, as we bring developers into a community. There are a fair number. Thankfully, a lot of other companies have built out these knowledge bases for you. But I think it's important internally to have one as well because everyone also defines terms a little bit differently. So you can have kind of one that's like, best guess, go here. If it doesn't seem quite right or doesn't line up with what you're hearing, go here. Also in the code, comment your code. A thing no one does. Comment your code. A tool that I actually really like that's new is called Swim, and it's a IDE-based documentation tool that goes directly into VS Code. So you can actually document, and when a developer opens up their IDE, it explains what's happening, but it's not directly in the code. So I find that one to be a really cool tool. But yeah, documentation, a thing no one likes to do, but everyone should do. Any other questions? Yes?
So, some of what you covered over here also kind of is related to the philosophy of design thinking.
Yeah.
The 5 steps process, more formal and systematic.
Mm-hmm.
That it also takes a lot of time and resources.
Yeah.
In the beginning. So for developers, do you see a more fine-tuned and shorter process to achieve some of that?
Yeah. So is there like a shorter, more fine-tuned version of the, these different processes that kind of exist with design and all of that? Definitely. I think a lot of this is a muscle you have to build, right? So it starts off very formally, right? You kind of have to set the rules, set the steps. And then as you go, it starts to become second nature, right? The idea of a talk aloud, right? The first time you watch a YouTuber film a React, they're gonna sit there silent and then be like, oh, I should be talking, right? But as they practice and keep going, it becomes second nature to them. And I think that's kind of what ends up happening with a lot of these like design and different requirements, like the simple, easy, quick one. I said that to my last chief product officer, and I was in a meeting with her, and she said, oh, it's so simple. And she went, no, I'm not supposed to say that. And she had a complete freak out in this meeting. She's like, I'm not supposed to say that. Julie said I'm not supposed to say that. What am I supposed to say instead? I was like, you can use the word simple, just don't say something is simple, right? It can be simple, but it doesn't have to be simple for someone to do. 2 very different concepts, right? And so it's building a muscle and practicing it, I think, is really the hard part. So you have to, go in knowing it might take a little bit and be a little bit filled with friction for everyone. But after, a few practice rounds, everyone will start to pick it up, right? They'll start to think, oh, how does this affect, John, the designer, versus Timothy, right? At Gusto, we had different personas. And as we built things, we said, how does that affect Sandy, right? That was just, it started to become lexicon. Does this impact Sandy or does this impact Todd? it's a building process.
Did you, you're talking about the personas, like, do you have personas for your internal company as well as your external customer, and you account for all of that?
So for the most part, we had external ones, right? Because we're our own internal team. So we can kind of think about it, of what we're doing for them as well. But it was mostly external. But with a lot of these things, you do have layers of external also, which I think if I was a blank slate, right, start with the easiest ones, don't go like down every rabbit hole. I think if 3 to 5 personas is about all you need and you can hit almost every persona. If you have like more than 5, you're way overcomplicating something, right? You have like a technical person, a non-technical person, and like a CEO. Those are your 3. Questions? Questions. Yes.
What is the biggest challenge that you have encountered in your career in adopting this sort of mentality?
Buy-in. Also, ego, right? Developers have egos more than most people. And when you tell them they're wrong or that they're being rude, they go, I don't care, and they walk away from you. And you're like, cool. So I think, learning how to pick those battles and knowing when, it's not worth the battle and just doing it yourself sometimes is faster than trying to get buy-in in terms of, right, all these different things. That's usually the biggest challenge I have found in doing all of this, right, is can I really change a person or not? You can't change anyone and you can't make anyone do anything. You can just kind of show them the way and hope they get it, right? Leading the horse to water. And sometimes you just have to give up and just bring the water to them. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns, ponderings?
The first step of know your customer, developers they don't have direct communication usually with the customers, right?
Right.
Communication with product managers are handling discussions with customers. So how do they remove that formation bias? Like, first of all, it's funneling through like piecemeal.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to build your persona over time, and you make a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
At the beginning. So how can we have the refining persona as an ongoing basis of your daily work?
Yeah. So how can we refine personas like on a daily basis? I wouldn't say do it on a daily basis, right? It's experimentation. You don't have an experiment that only runs for one day and then you go, well, that's the answer, right? Because you have to see the trends over time and all these different things. I also think your personas change based off of what your goals are at a company, right? In developer relations, there's kind of a few different common themes people go for, right? Do you want to go for a self-service? That's going to be a different type of persona than if you want to go for the big banks, right? Because how you're serving them is completely different. So, right, context matters. And recognizing it matters is okay. It's just not wiping out everything you already did because you changed your personas, right? It's building on top of it. It's a building block, right? Just because I built a self-service thing and now I'm going to big banks doesn't mean I need to remove my self-service functions. They're still going to be there because they're still serving someone. I can just pivot and look at it from a different angle. So that's kind of how I would do it with this like refinement. It's a refinement and a pivot. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Pivoting, you realize as a developer that you need to pivot, or your product manager needs to realize that they need to pivot as well. It's not like a patchwork.
Yeah, it's not a patchwork, and I think it's an entire company, right? I think a developer can recognize it if it's the KPI you're going for is different, right? Then you go, this persona doesn't fit this KPI, right? Like it can just truly be these two things don't go together. And then that's a conversation, right? I think oftentimes with a lot of persona things, we view them in silos. And I think it's a conversation that needs to happen, not a, I'm just gonna build for this persona, right? Yeah, that's how I would think about it. I think everything's a rule, but it's not, basically, right? Nothing is really as firm as anyone says it is, and if anyone does say that, then they're not gonna grow. Any other questions? Yes?
One of the things that I think about immediately is being in a meeting with people from different areas, right? And what I find is that you have someone who may not truly have the knowledge to back up what they're talking about,
Yeah.
but they just know, they hear the acronyms thrown around, they hear, they hear all these other words, they take that in and they use it as buzzwords.
Yeah.
So, for example, if we talk about KYC without actually talking about what it means,
Yeah.
someone can say, yeah, but KYC,
Yeah.
KYC can do this, but it's like, I feel like there has to be a way to meet in the middle where it's just like, when you're trying to know your audience, that, it's like, they may be using these acronyms, but I also don't want to make them feel badly about
Yeah.
the fact that I'm trying to, like, simplify it for them.
Yeah.
Like,
So.
how would you approach that?
Yeah, so the question is really about like how do you simplify, right? People using using terms as buzzwords just because they hear them and maybe they don't fully understand what it means. A lot of the times when I've experienced that, I level set. I go like, let's all agree on what this term means and like let's break it down. At Drive Wealth, I sat in a meeting and I explained to all the product managers what an endpoint was. And we all had to agree on it. Right? An endpoint is a path with get, post, put, patch, delete. That was like our most base level. Once they knew that, when an engineer said, what's the endpoint? They would say it. And then, an engineer could disagree, but if at least one whole group is in agreement on what something means, it kind of spreads out. So I think the best way to go about that is to just be like, put it on yourself. Be like, I just want to make sure we're on the same terms. I want to make sure that like everyone's in agreement in this room because, KYC has a lot of different meanings in fintech itself. So I believe what you are talking about is, right? And kind of go in, right? That's that going in with that empathy, going in with the, I'm sorry, I'm the idiot in the room, right? Like, play stupid is what I say. It's true. If you blame yourself for being the idiot, you can totally win over a room. You can be the dumbest person in the room and actually be the smartest person.
So different departments use the same acronyms differently.
Yeah.
And actually, if leaders realize that what they can do is they can create a taxonomy or a dictionary that
Yep.
and document it, and everyone, this is what it means. This is how we are going to use this. It takes time to enforce it.
Yep. Again, all of this is not an overnight. None of this is overnight. None of this is like, we're going to defeat the curse of knowledge bias tomorrow, right? You don't defeat the curse of knowledge bias in one day, right? You iterate, you refine, you set a standard, and that standard may be completely wrong. And that's okay because you learned what's wrong. And then you can try something else, right? It's constantly building on it. I had a leader who, whenever they used an acronym, they explained it. They like literally would put a definition next to every acronym on a page. Like if they use an acronym, they would link it to a definition. And that was how they made sure everyone was on the same page. So no one could assume what something was, right? Assume you make an ass out of you and me. Like, that's basically what we're discussing, is basically the curse of knowledge bias is assuming. Cool. So if anyone else has any other questions, we can chit chat afterwards, but I think lunch is going to be ready soon. I think everyone wants that. So thank you, everyone, for the talk.